What happens when a tired waitress unknowingly exposes wrongdoing right in front of the owner himself? The drizzle that had lingered since dawn showed no signs of letting up as an old silver pickup truck quietly rolled into the parking lot of Aurora Diner, branch number 42. It was a gray, chilly Monday morning, but the man behind the wheel paid no mind to the weather. He turned off the engine, pulled out a napkin to wipe the condensation off the windshield, then glanced at his watch. Exactly 7:30 a.m., the busiest hour of the day. Everything was going according to plan. He pulled his baseball cap low, adjusted his wrinkled flannel shirt and simple reading glasses, completing the look of a weary, middle-aged man who looked like he had just finished a long, cross-state trip. No one would suspect that he was, in fact, Maxwell Reed, CEO and founder of the Aurora Diner chain, now undercover as a retired truck driver named Walter Miles. Maxwell didn't disguise himself often, but whenever he did, it was always for a reason that couldn't be ignored. And this time, the reason wouldn't let him wait any longer. On paper, branch number 42 appeared solid. Consistent revenue, good management, seemingly nothing to worry about. But Maxwell's instincts, the same instincts that had saved him from 2 bankruptcies and built Aurora from a single roadside diner into a 12-state franchise, told him otherwise. The resignation rate at this location was 3 times the company average. Customers had made scattered complaints about disengaged, lifeless service. Reports from regional management painted a rosy picture, claiming it was just a temporary staffing adjustment. Maxwell didn't buy it, and he knew that the truth never lived in spreadsheets. It lived in the little things people often overlook. The eyes of a server, the way a menu is arranged, or the hesitation of a customer at the door. He stepped out of his truck, tightened his cap to better cover his graying hair, and quietly walked to the main entrance. Above him, the neon sign flickered, revealing the name Aurora Diner, though the letter A was only half lit. Maxwell tilted his head. That sign had been replaced less than a year ago, and already it looked neglected. A small detail, but in Maxwell's world, it said a lot. As he pushed open the door, a soft bell chimed, and the scent of bacon, pancakes, and fresh coffee enveloped him like a warm blanket against the cold rain. But beneath that comfort, he quickly sensed an unusual stillness. No cheerful greetings, no welcoming glances, not even a polite smile for the unfamiliar man who just walked in. A young woman named Ellie, according to the name tag on her chest, approached him in a hurry, her eyes slightly puffy. She wore no company badge, offered no greeting, just gestured wordlessly for him to follow. "Just you?" Her voice was flat, emotionless. Maxwell nodded gently, his southern accent soft and polite. "Yes, miss, just stopping by for some breakfast on my way to visit my daughter." Ellie led him to a small table near the kitchen, exactly where he'd hoped to sit to observe most of the dining area. She dropped the plastic menu on the table without a word. The restaurant wasn't chaotic, but the way the staff moved, disjointed, uncoordinated, and the way customers checked their watches while waiting told Maxwell more than any report could. He glanced around. 2 male employees in clean uniforms leaned on the coffee bar, chatting and sipping drinks, each serving just 2 tables. Meanwhile, another young waitress named Amira was working non-stop. She delivered orders with tired but deliberate movements, coffee cups filled, dishes served as requested, greetings short but genuine. Maxwell mentally noted her. And when she placed the cup of coffee in front of him with a faint, weary smile, he noticed the dark circles under her eyes, poorly concealed by cheap foundation, the mark of someone who hadn't slept, yet still showed up to do her job right. "You the only one working the whole floor?" Maxwell asked, eyes drifting back to the 2 chatting at the counter. Amira glanced at them, then quickly shook her head. "Maybe just a busy day. They're busy too," the textbook answer, but her voice lacked conviction. "Then I guess tips must be good today, huh?" he pressed. Amira froze briefly, her hand tightening around the coffee pot. Then, in a voice barely louder than a whisper, she said, "Only if you're allowed to keep them. Not everyone is." Maxwell said nothing more. But in his mind, a storm was gathering. The golden pancakes and ham on his plate suddenly seemed less important. Maxwell understood this breakfast wasn't just a Monday meal. It was the beginning of a quiet investigation he had long suspected was needed. What he had heard in less than 20 minutes might only be the tip of the iceberg. But it was enough to confirm one thing. Beneath its polished exterior, Branch 42 was rotting from within. And he, whether as CEO or just Walter Miles, wasn't going to stand by and watch it crumble. As the dim light from the kitchen cast a soft glow across the table, Maxwell sat quietly in the role of a solitary man sipping his morning coffee. But every one of his senses was taut like a drawn string. What Amira had just uttered may have sounded like a passing complaint, but he knew better. Once someone begins to speak, it means they are nearing the edge. The real question was who or what had pushed her to that brink, and how many others had been forced into silence or walked away when they had nowhere else to hold on. As Amira turned to serve the table next to his, he watched her closely. Her steps were quick but never frantic, nimble, yet carrying a subtle limp in her right leg, as though nursing an old wound that refused to heal. There are things the eye can't always see, but Maxwell had once been a server himself, had washed dishes, even slept on wooden benches through long night shifts without enough money to rent a room. He saw in Amira a reflection of his younger self, someone small, yet fighting injustice with quiet endurance. The soft jingle of the front door broke the stillness as new customers entered, and Ellie, the girl who had shown him to his seat, continued moving like a machine. No greeting, no expression. In contrast, Amira immediately took the new table, even though it clearly fell within the area covered by the two male staff lounging by the coffee bar. Maxwell took note of the names on their badges, Miles and Connor. These two seemed to operate without any direction or supervision. They did as they pleased, laziness on full display, and worse, they occasionally threw mocking glances at Amira. It wasn't just arrogance, it reeked of entitlement. Entitlement that had been sanctioned by power, by a system that was inexplicably favoring them. Then a family with 3 children entered. Maxwell saw Ellie initially guiding them toward the section under Miles' care, but after a subtle glance from behind the counter, from a middle-aged man in a dark shirt, name tag reading Douglas Crane, manager, she changed direction and led them to a table in Amira's area. Maxwell paid close attention to that switch, swift, emotionless, as though it was a routine response to an unspoken order. It all happened in mere seconds, but to someone seasoned in the business, the meaning was clear. Here, fairness wasn't a principle, it was a trap. Injustice was being used as a tool to maintain control, and Amira sat at the bottom of that pyramid. When she returned to his table with the trucker's classic breakfast, every detail of the plating immaculate, Maxwell gently prodded, "You must be the only one left here who still holds to professional standards." Amira gave a faint smile, but her eyes were cautious. She answered softly, "I just don't want customers to leave hungry and angry." He met her eyes, his voice kind. "So, do the customers at least leave tips?" A brief pause, then she confessed as if revealing a shameful secret. "If they pay by card, the tips go somewhere else. I'm not authorized to process them." Maxwell nodded, the way an old man might to show empathy. But inside, a tide was rising. This was no longer suspicion. This was a sophisticated fraud scheme disguised within digital systems, the kind only insiders could recognize. He casually asked about the area, spoke of a daughter planning to move to town, skillfully pulling Amira into a short conversation. In the dim light from the wall sconce, he noticed her smile only appeared when no one else was watching. As she bent down to collect the bill, he quietly slipped a $20 bill beneath his empty coffee cup and another under the plate of pancakes, hoping at least one would reach her. Rising slowly, he feigned the shuffle of an older man, but really it was his final scan of the room. He saw Connor collecting payment from a table that should have been Amira's, saw Doug nod slightly toward Miles as he glanced at the POS display. Everything was clear. Tips weren't shared equally. Tips were distributed through a hidden code, and the ones holding the keys weren't systems. They were the people manipulating them from behind the scenes. As Maxwell stepped outside, the rain had eased, but his mind hadn't. The reflection on the truck window showed Walter Miles, grizzled, rumpled, but those eyes belonged to a lion ready to return to the pride. He pulled out his phone and dialed Ava Jordan, Aurora's head of internal investigations. "Ava, I need you to cancel all my meetings today and meet me at Branch 42 within the hour." His voice was slow, deliberate, firm. "Bring full access to the POS system, log in records, and the last 30 days of surveillance footage, and make absolutely sure No one knows I've been here." Maxwell ended the call. The story hadn't officially begun, but he knew the ending would not simply be about firings. This was the time to pull back the rug and see just how much filth had been swept beneath the floor that everyone believed was clean. Aurora Diner was rotting, and he, the founding father, would be the one to pull the last nail from its false facade. Inside the temporary conference room of the Aurora Lakeside Hotel, the glow from a large screen cast shadows across the faces of three people, each tense as an undeniable truth slowly came into focus. Maxwell Reed had shed his disguise hours earlier. The fake beard was gone, his flannel shirt and glasses replaced by a neatly rolled up white button-down. But what truly made him different wasn't his outfit, it was his eyes, cold, precise, as if every story he had just heard from Amira wasn't mere information, but a command issued to the deepest part of his conscience. Ava Jordan, head of internal investigations, sat at her laptop, her fingers flying across spreadsheets with the efficiency of someone used to handling multi-million-dollar fraud, though her brows furrowed deeper with each new piece of evidence. Beside her, Luis, a systems technician, opened the POS login data. "The official system doesn't show Amira's name on a single credit card transaction in the past 2 months," he said, then clicked a line of code. "Every morning shift is handled by one of these three." On the screen, a rotation of names appeared: Connor Crane, Miles Jordan, and a third, Stephen Geller, staff member and assistant manager. Maxwell crossed his arms, unsurprised. "Let me guess. Geller is a close friend or relative of the branch manager?" Ava nodded and pulled up another file. "He's Doug Crane's brother-in-law." Just as Maxwell suspected. This wasn't favoritism. It was a carefully constructed network of interest, with family ties, assigned roles, and scripted loopholes to bypass internal checks. But what disturbed Maxwell most was the silence. "What do the last 6 months of HR records say about complaints?" he asked. Tanya, the HR investigator, opened a thick printed dossier, flipping through the pages with care. "Only 3 formal grievances, all marked as resolved and signed off by S. Geller, Assistant Operations Manager." She pointed at the signature line. "The problem is, no one audited the resolutions, and the final reviewer was Doug Crane." Maxwell closed his eyes for a few seconds. He wasn't angry. Anger was an emotional reaction. At this point, he was analyzing, dismantling the gears of a system designed not just to deceive the company, but to betray the very trust he had placed in the people he once believed in. Luis brought up video footage from the kitchen camera. There was no sound, but body language said everything. Doug stood in the center, holding a metal cash box, counting bills, then distributing them evenly between Connor, Miles, and Stephen. Amira, in her faded apron, stood at the edge of the frame, reaching out and saying something. Doug didn't even look her way, waving her off like a bothersome fly. Connor laughed, clutching a payout double the others. Ava paused the video, her eyes turning to Maxwell. "There's no audio, but the message is crystal clear." Maxwell nodded, silently. He didn't speak, but his mind had already begun mapping the next steps. Legal reports, personal account tracing, financial evidence. Tanya added, "I contacted 6 former employees who resigned over the last 4 months. 5 admitted they left because they were pushed into slow shifts, denied tips, or reassigned to low-traffic zones after questioning the money distribution." She handed over a summary, color-coded to show the correlation between when they raised concerns and when they were penalized. They didn't file official reports because they knew it would get them labeled as uncooperative, and Doug would make sure that label followed them to other branches. Ava chimed in. "We also discovered that Doug owns a private LLC called Crane Hospitality Solutions. In the past 3 months, that company received 7 wire transfers from an auxiliary account within our POS system, with unclear designations. Total amount, 9,812s. Maxwell didn't need further explanation. Doug had exploited the temporary hold for auditing function, originally designed for emergency management, to funnel tip money into his own pockets through a legal entity. Everything was intentional, and none of it would have come to light, if not for a girl named Amira, brave enough to glance sideways and whisper a single truth while pouring coffee for a stranger in disguise. Maxwell turned to Ava, his gaze softening, but his voice steady and resolute. I don't just want termination notices. I want clarity. So clear that no one dares rebuild this system anywhere else. This isn't just fraud, it's betrayal, and the first people who deserve to know are the ones still silent out of fear. Ava nodded, her eyes sharpening. So how do you want to proceed? Maxwell looked back at the screen, frozen on the frame where Amira reached out, the silent image of someone still holding on to integrity inside a corrupted system. He spoke slowly and deliberately. We're not handling this from a boardroom. I want it done on site, during Friday morning rush, the busiest hour of the week. I want every staff member present, every customer to witness it, so they'll know Aurora does not abandon the good. And as the three in the room turned their eyes toward the blinking message on the system dashboard, Branch 42, status operating normally, they all knew that in a few days that status would change forever, and this time no one would be allowed to look away. Thursday morning arrived with a rare stillness. The sky was blanketed in slate gray, casting a gloomy veil over the town, but Maxwell Reed paid it no mind. Sitting before the mirror in his hotel room, he carefully combed his silver hair, straightened each crease on his fresh flannel shirt, then put back on the same disguise that had once allowed him to deceive an entire branch running astray. Walter Miles was back, but this time not to observe, but to bring it all to a close. By the window, Ava Jordan, dressed simply like a daughter taking her father out for breakfast, glanced at her watch and asked, "Are you sure? We already have enough evidence for termination and prosecution. You don't need to go back." Maxwell didn't turn, only replied calmly, "I'm not going back for more evidence. I'm going back so they can see something the system has never shown them, that someone truly sees them and cares." An hour later, the rental car stopped in front of Aurora Diner number 42. Maxwell and Ava stepped inside, and once again, the familiar chime rang, this time signaling the beginning of a carefully orchestrated plan. The diner looked just as before, with soft yellow lights, the clatter from the coffee bar, and the endless hum of the espresso machine. But Maxwell, now armed with an entire dossier in his mind, saw everything through a different lens. Tables slightly off-center, shift assignments still uneven, and most importantly, there was Amira, still the same girl, now looking even more exhausted than the last time, hustling from table to table while Miles and Connor laughed with guests at the less busy sections. "Walter? You really came back?" Amira was surprised to see him. She glanced quickly toward Doug, who was watching from the register with a scrutinizing stare. "Your daughter came with you today?" Ava smiled and waved like a polite guest, but Maxwell noticed that Amira's smile was a bit more forced today. "She said I talked about this place so much, she just had to try it," he replied with a warm, gentle tone. Amira placed the menus on the table and whispered, "You'll probably have a different server today. Doug says returning guests need to be rotated for a varied experience." "That's what they call it." Maxwell nodded as if he understood, but inside, he was seething. "As long as the coffee's still yours," he joked, and saw her crack a faint smile before quickly walking away. Minutes later, Connor appeared with a confident air and a smile just a bit too practiced. "I'm Connor. I'll be your server today. I hear you're a big fan of our pancakes?" Maxwell nodded and casually asked a seemingly innocent but loaded question. "I heard there's a new membership card now, with discounts and rewards?" Connor's eyes lit up immediately. "That's right. The card's preloaded, helps you pay faster, and racks up points. One of management's best ideas." Ava gave a subtle nod to her father. The plan was going exactly as hoped. Breakfast went on like any other. Connor served the dishes efficiently, kept up light conversation, while Amira, just behind the bar, continued serving twice as many tables as anyone else. Not once did she process a credit card. Maxwell and Ava took note of every detail. And then, as they wrapped up their meal, Maxwell slowly took a membership card from his wallet, slid it across the table and said, "I'll pay with this." Then added deliberately, "And I'm leaving a $50 tip. That was an outstanding meal." Connor blinked but quickly regained his composure. "That's very generous. Don't worry, tips are shared fairly here." At that moment, Ava glanced at her watch and tapped her phone screen, a small move that triggered the surveillance team's remote tracking protocol. The payment went through. The $50 tip entered the system, and just as they expected, the only person registered as the recipient was Connor Crane, the employee operating the POS. As soon as they exited the diner, the data synced with the central server. Luis appeared on a video call to Ava, his screen showing a live transaction map. Confirmed. The tip was not split. Sole recipient recorded. Employee ID number CC102, Connor Crane. Ava turned to Maxwell, but he had already risen, facing the hotel window where the morning sun peeked through the white curtain. "Every piece is in place," he said. "Tomorrow morning, we lay the whole table out for them to see." Friday morning arrived with a strange clarity, as if nature itself sensed that something significant was about to unfold. At exactly 8:45, 3 sleek black SUVs pulled into the parking lot of Aurora Diner number 42, their wheels rolling slowly over the dew-damp pavement, leaving shimmering trails under the morning sun. Inside the diner, the clinking of spoons against coffee cups paused. Patrons looked up toward the windows with curious expressions. No one understood what was happening until the front door opened and a group of people stepped inside. Without a word, their presence spoke volumes. Leading them was a tall man with silver hair, dressed in a charcoal gray suit tailored to perfection. His steps were measured, deliberate, and with each stride the room seemed to pull back ever so slightly. Gone was Walter Miles, the kindly old man from a few days ago. In his place stood Maxwell Reed, CEO of the entire Aurora Diner chain. Behind him walked Ava Jordan, sharp-eyed and carrying a heavy folder, followed by the internal investigation team, security personnel, and 2 corporate attorneys. The collective presence filled the room with a weight that made it hard to breathe. Doug Crane emerged from his office, offering a polite smile at first, but his expression froze the moment his eyes met the man before him. "Mr. Reed, I didn't know you were coming today." "Clearly you didn't," Maxwell replied, cutting him off. His voice was calm but carried across the entire restaurant. He didn't stop for handshakes, nor did he exchange pleasantries. Instead, he turned to the customers and spoke clearly. "Apologies for the interruption. I'm Maxwell Reed, CEO of Aurora Diner. We are conducting an emergency audit of this location. Your breakfast today is on the house. Please enjoy it as usual. But if you're curious, feel free to watch." He nodded to an investigator who immediately began handing out free meal vouchers to every table. Doug Crane tried to maintain composure, but his face had already gone pale. Connor Crane stood frozen behind the coffee counter, still holding a glass of water he never managed to serve. "Mr. Reed, I assure you there's nothing unusual here. If you'll give me just a moment, I can explain." Doug began to stammer. "You'll have a chance to explain," Maxwell cut in again, "but not with words, with data. Data doesn't lie." Ava stepped forward and opened the folder, revealing spreadsheets, graphs, and POS transaction reports that unfolded like a legal indictment. Over the past 6 months, the system shows more than $18,000 in tips not properly distributed. We have photographic evidence, system logs, and corroborating statements from 7 former employees. Not to mention a series of transfers to a private business account registered under the name Crane Hospitality Solutions LLC. Doug's face drained of all color. Connor, almost instinctively, took a step toward the rear exit but was stopped by 2 security staff. Ava seized the moment. "And this," she said, rotating her iPad to show the guests and staff, "is a transaction from yesterday morning. A $50 tip was entered by Mr. Connor Crane, who did not serve the table, but the entire amount was credited to him. No sharing, no redistribution, no notification." The room fell silent. Amira, standing near the register, was visibly shaking but kept her composure. She hadn't yet grasped everything that was happening when Maxwell looked directly at her, not just acknowledging her but publicly honoring her courage. He stepped forward, his voice dropping but resonating with unmistakable clarity. "Doug Crane, Connor Crane. Effective immediately, you are suspended from all duties at Aurora Diner. We are proceeding with legal action regarding fraudulent activity, misappropriation of funds, and abuse of power in the workplace." Doug seemed to want to protest, but only managed a few incoherent words. Connor opened his mouth to argue but fell silent under Maxwell's gaze. The 2 were escorted out of the restaurant in heavy silence. No applause, no cheering, just a quiet release in the eyes of everyone left behind. And in that moment, Amira stepped forward, tears welling up not from sadness, but from relief. "So, you weren't just a passerby," she whispered. Maxwell nodded, offering a small, knowing smile. But what you did, that wasn't an act, and because of that, all of this was possible. 1 month later, as autumn slowly came to a close, the cold, lingering rains no longer clung to the small town as they once did. Early winter sunlight spread evenly across the road leading to Aurora Diner number 42, a location that had once been a quiet embarrassment within the system, now bearing an entirely new appearance. Maxwell Reed no longer wore a disguise. He walked into the diner as himself, without concealment and without fanfare. The sound of the doorbell was as familiar as always, but the atmosphere inside had changed, so much so that he paused for a moment upon entering. Gone were the weary yellow lights and the disorganized rush of footsteps. In their place was a bright, clean space where employees dressed uniformly, and every face reflected confidence and warmth. Near the entrance stood a digital display clearly showing the names of all on-shift employees along with a real-time chart of service area assignments. Beneath it, a small but powerful line read, "Tips are gratitude, sharing is responsibility, transparency is our promise." Maxwell smiled. He didn't need to ask who had made all of this happen, and just as he expected, the first person to greet him wasn't anyone else. It was Amira. But she was no longer the weary-eyed girl with the faded apron. She emerged in a crisp new uniform, with a name badge that now read Manager, gleaming under the overhead lights. Her posture was steady, her gaze confident, her voice composed yet warm. "Good morning, Mr. Reed. Your usual table is ready. If you don't mind, I'd love to sit with you for a few minutes before the morning rush." Maxwell nodded and followed her to the same table, the one where, just a month ago, a mistreated employee had quietly revealed the truth, and a CEO disguised as a regular man had listened to every word. Amira poured him coffee, the gesture still precise but no longer tense, then sat across from him, careful but no longer guarded. She shared that following last month's sweep, not only were Doug and Connor dismissed, but the entire shift management, POS structure, and tip distribution system across the region were audited. At Branch 42, most of the team remained, except for those who had participated in or covered up wrongdoing. Most chose to stay. They said, "It finally feels like this place really belongs to them," she said with a smile, her eyes glowing with a quiet happiness she hadn't felt in a long time. When Maxwell asked about her studies, Amira blushed, but her eyes gleamed with pride. "My final semester in accounting starts next week. With the company's support package and the compensation from the investigation, I no longer have to choose between going to school and paying the bills." She paused, then added gently and sincerely, "For the first time in my life, I don't have to stay silent just to survive." Maxwell looked at her and nodded. For him, no reward was greater than seeing someone once afraid now standing tall on their own. His eyes scanned the restaurant. Each table had a small placard explaining how tips were divided, personal POS logins were encrypted, and a digital display tracked transactions in real time. Next to the register stood a tablet connected directly to the company's internal feedback system. Every comment went straight to Central HQ. Ava had named it the Silence Breaker, and just as she'd hoped, since its launch, over 200 entries had been submitted across all branches. The majority were suggestions for improvement, not complaints. It was a sign of a culture learning how to heal itself. Maxwell took a sip of his coffee and asked quietly, "And Stan?" The regional manager who had once ignored all warning signs. Amira chuckled. "He shows up every week now, just as the new policy requires. Still a little awkward, but he doesn't dodge things anymore. After mandatory ethics and oversight training, he's clearly changed. Though, every time we talk, he still avoids eye contact a bit." They both laughed softly. Not everyone is malicious. Sometimes they're just too used to turning a blind eye out of convenience. As the morning rush began, Amira stood, bowed politely, and returned to the coordination desk. Maxwell sat for a few more minutes, then stepped to the back into the kitchen, once Doug's territory of control. Now, the space brimmed with energy. Shift transitions ran smoothly. Task assignments were clearly posted, and a training manual sat neatly beside the thing that made him smile most. Amira's Principles of Basic Accounting textbook placed next to the shift schedule, along with a handwritten note. "Every satisfied customer is long-term profit." Maxwell left the diner in peace. As he glanced back through the window, he saw Amira smiling at an elderly guest, sunlight casting a warm glow behind her, illuminating the newly framed motto on the wall. Respect begins with honesty. Success grows from trust. He knew then, this was no longer the Branch 42 of the past. It was proof that transformation does not begin with firings, but with one person willing to stand up and speak a small truth in the midst of a great silence. Maxwell Reed stood beside the small lake behind the Aurora Lakeside Hotel, a steaming cup of coffee in hand. The water lay still, reflecting the late autumn sky speckled with thin clouds, strangely peaceful after everything that had unfolded. A few meters away, ducks paddled lazily beneath the old wooden bridge, a simple scene, yet it stirred something in him, a quiet sense of transition. Perhaps it was the shift from anger to clarity, from isolated action to systemic change. Perhaps it was the moment when a founder begins passing the torch to the generation that follows. His phone buzzed once in his pocket. A new message from Ava appeared with just 12 words. Nebraska branch. POS system showing signs of irregular distribution. Maxwell didn't reply immediately. He gazed across the lake, then slowly set the cup down on the wooden ledge. This trip could have ended here, with one branch restored, one former employee becoming its new leader, and one wrongdoing brought into the light. But he knew better than anyone that wherever there is neglect, there is opportunity for abuse. And sometimes, all it takes is a tiny gap for unjust hands to find their way back in. It wasn't a system error. It was a deeper illness known by another name. I thought no one was watching. Maxwell returned to the makeshift operations room. Ava was already there with Luis and Tanya. On the screen, a system map lit up with red dots, branches already inspected, and a few blinking yellow ones, under observation. After the Aurora No. 42 case, he had quietly launched a randomized audit across 10 other branches. 2 were stable. 7 had minor issues, manageable through training and software upgrades. But 1, Nebraska, showed troubling similarities to the old abuse model. Vague tip distribution, uneven table assignments, key staff pushed into off-peak shifts. Ava had just finished a call with a former employee who confirmed she'd filed a complaint after being repeatedly assigned shifts without POS access, and was then moved to back-to-back overnight slots. Luis typed a few commands, switching the display to transaction reports. Patterns repeating, he murmured, eyes locked on the graph. One employee ID accounts for nearly 90% of morning shift card transactions, even though at least 4 servers were on duty. Maxwell nodded, a decisive gleam in his eyes. He turned to Tanya. Prep Team 2, I want them there by this afternoon. Then to Ava, you and I fly out in the morning. No notice, no meeting with the manager. We'll go as customers, the same way it all began. Ava looked at him, half cautious, half in awe. Don't you ever get tired? Maxwell gave a small smile, the kind worn by someone who stood at too many crossroads in life. You know, he said, Doug was right about one thing. No one checks the little things, but that's exactly how injustice creeps in. And if we don't check them, who will? He turned back to the system map, resting his hand on a newly blinking yellow point. Justice doesn't need to be celebrated. It just needs to be carried out, quietly, consistently, and without compromise. Before leaving the room, Maxwell paused before a photograph taken just a week ago. Amira standing by the digital tip board, behind her a row of tables running like clockwork. She wasn't looking into the camera, but her smile shone like a small light, warm enough to lift an entire team. He murmured, as if speaking only to himself, if one person brave enough to speak up can change the system, then the job of the one holding the wheel isn't to thank her, it's to clean up the places she couldn't reach. The next morning, Nebraska's skies were overcast but dry. Their plane landed at the small regional airport at 7:05 a.m. Ava handed him a fresh membership card. Same tool, same sweet bait that once exposed the truth. Maxwell took it, tucked it into his wallet, then pulled down the old baseball cap, his final layer of disguise, not because he needed to hide who he was, but because it served as a reminder that justice, sometimes, doesn't require a title. It only takes someone who truly cares. In a world driven by reports and numbers, sometimes the truth reveals itself through the smallest things, a weary glance, a strained smile, or a whispered sentence over a morning cup of coffee. The story of Maxwell and Amira isn't just about an abuse of power being exposed, It's a reminder that true justice begins when someone chooses to listen and someone else dares to speak. If you believe that every act of kindness deserves to be protected, like this video, subscribe so you won't miss other inspiring stories, and leave a comment with the phrase "Dare to Rise" to help spread this spirit even further.